Hello, my name is Jacqueline Heidegger, and I am a career advisor with Career and Professional Development Services. Today, we're going to be discussing how to ace your next teaching interview. We will be discussing some best practices that can be applied to any interview you might do in the future for any opportunity inside of education or outside education. However, some of the examples I'm providing will be specific to the teaching positions that you might be applying for. So, as an overview of where we'll be going today, we are going to be discussing how to prepare for your interviews, how to dress when you actually go to an in-person interview. We'll be going through different interview types and how you can best succeed in those different interview types. And then we'll also be discussing first impressions and how to make yours count, how to effectively communicate your story through your interview answers to the questions that you're being asked, what types of questions you might be asked and how to decode them in order to provide the most effective answer for your employer. And then finally, what goes into effective follow-up after a teaching interview. So I want to start by saying that the interview process for teaching positions changes based on the time of year, the level of year that you might be hoping to teach in, the different school districts you might be applying to, or the schools that you might be applying to. So you want to keep all of the best practices we talk about today in mind, but there are certainly some strategies you can employ to figure out what is your interview process going to be like, depending on all of those factors that might change what your interview process for your teaching positions might look like. Keep in mind that the more you know about your interview process prior to going into that first interview, the better. When you are offered an interview or begin planning to go to one of our school district job fairs, ask who will be interviewing you, what their titles are, how long that interview is going to take, and any other information that might be helpful for you as you begin to prepare for your interview. That's the first step for preparing. And the reason I say that is that it's going to go a long way for you. It's going to help you mentally prepare, but also physically prepare for your interviews. Now let's dive into some additional steps for preparation. I think the first suggestion I would give is to research yourself. You want to make sure you're checking your social media sites to make sure that you are representing yourself professionally as a future teacher. Google your name to see what comes up. This is another reason why I always suggest creating a LinkedIn profile, because if you have a really built out professional profile, that is going to be one of the first links that pops up, and that could hopefully give your employer a lot of information about your professional self. You also want to make sure that you are researching the districts or the schools that you are applying to. You can do this by going to their website and looking to fully understand the services that the district or school offers and provides. You want to make sure you know the history of that district or school, have the mission statement, vision, values in mind, and you also want to try to learn the student demographics. All of those different pieces are going to help you know if you've got a fit at that district or that organization, but it's also going to be helpful for you when you are communicating during your interview. You certainly want to make sure that you are tailoring your interview experience to that district or to that school, just as we did our application materials. So refresh your brain as you prepare for your interviews. You want to make sure that it doesn't seem like you don't know anything about that school district or that school and the position. You also want to make sure you know who works at that school or school district, and that you know some of the things about their professional selves too. That's another reason why LinkedIn is really helpful. Most likely the interviewers are going to ask you if you have any questions for them, and one of the only wrong answers for this is no. You always want to make sure you've prepared questions that are thoughtful and that matter to your search, because you're going to have the opportunity with those employers to ask those questions. These questions can be about the experience that the interviewers have had with the school district or school, the culture, who you will be working with, etc. You want to start thinking about what materials you're going to bring, such as a Padfolio and a notepad with your questions on it and to take notes, extra resumes, extra cover letters, a reference list. You might want to bring a pen to actually take some of those notes. And then this is where you might want to bring a couple of different USBs with any digital portfolio artifacts you've been collecting. You want to make sure you're willing to part with those USBs if you are going to give them away. Again, like I said during the application material workshop, portfolios are not often required anymore for teaching positions. However, it is something that can certainly enhance yourself as a professional within education to be curating your content. And the employer will likely not have a chance at the job fair or the interview to review it with you. But if you do want to, at the end of your interview, give away a USB with your digital portfolio, I think that that is a great way to enhance yourself in your interview process. You also want to make sure that you're reviewing your application materials. And this isn't the same type of review we do before we submit the application materials. It's not looking for grammar mistakes. At this point, they've already seen your resume and your cover letter. But what we are reviewing our resume and our other application materials for is to remind ourselves of everything that we have told them already. We want to make sure that our interview is an opportunity to further expand on the experiences we've already shared, or to share different experiences that the employer might not know about yet. This can also be a great confidence boost for you as you go into your interview to really review the way you told your story in relation to this specific job position prior to submitting the application. You also need to make sure you're practicing interviewing. We're going to talk through some of the different best practices for preparing for your interviews and ensuring that you're ready to interview, but there is no substitute for practicing answering questions and practicing telling your story effectively. You can schedule an appointment with my office, Career and Professional Development Services, in order to do a mock interview, or you can utilize a virtual interview streaming system, Interview Stream, in order to answer questions virtually and then watch yourself again. And you can even flag that for review by a career advisor. When you are going to an in-person interview or doing a virtual interview, you want to make sure that you are dressing for success. And what I mean by this is you want to make sure that you look professionally and you are dressed for the interview. We, especially my future teachers who have done some student teaching or internships within the school districts, we've seen how teachers dress, and I cannot stress enough that they likely did not dress that way when they were interviewing. So if you're seeing a teacher for early childhood that is wearing, flats or pants or something a little more comfy because they're going to be sitting on the ground with their students, that's not what you're going to wear for the interview. You want to make sure that you're dressing professionally for the interview, not necessarily the job. So make sure that you smell good, you look good, you've got your clothes are clean, you're not wearing too much perfume or any other type of odor. You want to make sure that you are wearing something conservative and that is suit style, so has a suit jacket with it, whether you're wearing a pantsuit or a skirt suit or a dress suit. And you want to make sure you're utilizing some traditional colors, navy, black, gray, brown, etc. You want to make sure you're limiting your jewelry so that it's not distracting from your story that you're telling in your interview. And then you want to make sure that you're wearing closed-toed shoes, you're wearing matching socks, those types of things, and that you have conservative hair and makeup while you are going to do that interview. I cannot stress this enough. You want to make sure you try on your outfit ahead of time, so that way you can make sure that it fits right and that you know the way you might need to move in it, because it's going to be different from your other movements. And it's also going to help you know what you're going to feel like on the morning of that interview. So it's going to help you feel more comfortable in that outfit. We do not suggest bringing in any type of large backpack to your interview. You want to make sure you're carrying your things or using a more professional bag. In terms of the first impression you're going to be making, I strongly suggest a firm handshake, a nice smile, eye contact, and excellent nonverbal communication, including your posture, facial expression, body tension, hand movements, and your interpretation of personal space within that interview. I would love for you to do our first activity by pausing this webinar and spending 2 to 3 minutes reflecting on the types of interviews you might have done in the past. What went well and what were you challenged by? All right, so let's talk through the different types of interviews you might have for your teaching interview process. First, you might have a phone interview. So I'm going to go through some tips that you might want to follow, some best practices for your phone interviews. First, even if they can't see you, they can hear you, and your nonverbals are still important, even though you're over the phone and they're only getting your voice. If you dress for your interview, you'll probably feel more confident and will remember some of those best practices we just talked about in terms of making that good first impression and dressing for success. You want to make sure that you're avoiding background noises, you're somewhere private with the door closed, that you're not going to have any noise interruptions for your interview. And you want to make sure that you are using your most confident voice. Your voice becomes more important when you're over the phone because it's all that they have for you. So you want to make sure to come off calm and confident. You want to make sure you're doing some volume control and you're not yelling, but you're also not whispering. Have someone else listen to you. Give them a phone call and pretend it's an interview and ask them for feedback on how you're coming off over the phone. End your questions strongly. Don't trail off. Oftentimes when we're talking on the phone casually, we might be talking more casually and trailing off at the end. Make sure you are recreating the in-person virtual space for yourself and holding yourself to the same standards as you would in communicating with somebody face-to-face. Make sure you are listening fully to the question so that way you can answer fully to the question that you're being asked. Try not to use a cell phone, but I know this can be hard. Cell phones can sometimes have spotty reception. You're going to be safer with a landline. However, if you do need to use a cell phone, make sure you are in an area with very good reception. Again, this is another reason why that call with your mom, your friend, a career advisor is going to be really helpful for you because it's going to help you see how you're coming off reception-wise as well in the location that you're taking your interview. Don't drive and stay in one place because again, that's going to interrupt reception. It's going to interrupt the different noise that might be heard in the background. Stay in one place, stay in one room. And then finally, you can have notes in front of you because they can't see you. And even in our in-person interviews, we can have notes, but you want to make sure that you are not reading off paper and sounding robotic or ruffling around the papers because that's going to be distracting to your interviewer. In-person interviews are a very common type of interview, and in-person interviews can be different. Not all in-person interviews are exactly the same, so we're going to talk through 3 types of in-person interviews. Our best first impression is very helpful when we are interviewing in person, so keep in mind the dress for success tips, but also our tips for creating that first impression through the way that we introduce ourselves. You could have a one-on-one interview that is in person where it's just you and one other person in the room. That could be the principal, that could be the hiring manager, it could be a portion of your screening interview. So keep that in mind that you might be just having a one-on-one conversation with somebody in person. What is highly common are panel interviews where you would have multiple people in the room and you would be interviewing with all of them. Oftentimes they will start these types of interviews with introductions and folks will popcorn around asking the questions. What's important here is that you are looking at whoever asked you the question, but you're also giving ample attention to the rest of the space. You want to make sure you're giving everybody a piece of eye contact, but giving the most of your attention during that question to the person who asked you that question. You could also participate in a group interview that's in person where you are not the only person that's interviewing for the position, and the way you interact with other people that are also interviewing is going to play a factor. So make sure that you are being confident and strong in your answers, but you also want to allow others to talk and interact. The employer will be evaluating your interactions with others for this type of interview. You want to make sure when you're in person that you're paying attention to the body language in the room with you. Just as they're watching you for your nonverbals, you should be paying attention to them and adjusting your answers for the rest of the questions accordingly. Make sure you have the correct time and location, and make sure you're showing up early. You want to make sure that you are arriving about 5 to 10 minutes early. So make sure that you have directions to where you're going and that you've gone there once before. I know some people that drive out to the site that they'll be interviewing at the day before just to make sure they know how to get there, where it is, what traffic is like. And then finally, make sure you're smiling and maintaining eye contact during your interview. You can certainly take notes on the questions or any thoughts you might have while they're asking the question, but you definitely want to make sure you're giving appropriate eye contact. Virtual interviews. Dress how you would, just as you would in an in-person interview, because they're going to be able to see you. Make sure you set up your account for Skype, Google Hangouts, whatever virtual platform they might be utilizing ahead of time so you're not late to signing in for your interview. You also want to make sure your background setting is not distracting, and a blank wall, more blank than mine today, is going to be what you're going to want for an interview with Google Hangouts, Skype, some type of virtual setting. Ensure that your camera is centered on your face and that your shoulders and up are visible. You don't need your whole body visible, and you do not want to be utilizing your phone as if you're FaceTiming somebody. Recorded interviews are a lot like virtual interviews, only you don't have somebody there asking you the questions in that live moment. You record yourself answering questions. If you know you're going to have a recorded interview, I highly suggest logging onto InterviewStream and practicing that type of setting. Make sure you ask questions about the interview type when you are offered the interview or begin preparing for the school district job fair that you might be going to for your teaching positions. This is going to help you effectively prepare for your interview and make sure that you're getting all the necessary information if you need to be in person or if you're going to need to set up any type of virtual communication or double check your phone reception. I would like you to do another activity for me. Please spend about 2 to 3 minutes to reflect on what a positive first impression might look like for a phone interview. What about an in-person interview? What about a virtual interview? And finally, how about a recorded interview? You can pause the webinar now. So when we're giving our best first impression, a lot of it is going to be through our nonverbals and our introduction. So those first 30 seconds with the interviewer. Obviously, the way that we give that first impression is going to vary based on the medium of our interview. In person, again, you want to make sure you're giving a firm handshake, eye contact, and smiling, and you want to do all three of those at the same time. And if you are virtual, recorded, or if you're in person, I can't stress it enough. Dress for success. It's so important that I felt like I needed to mention it twice. No matter if you're in person, on the phone, or another medium, again, your nonverbal communication is going to communicate a lot. For my phone interviewers, I always suggest smiling a little more than you naturally would because your tone and your voice actually change when you are smiling. So make sure that you are paying attention to your body language even when you're on the phone because it's going to come through with your voice. All right, time for another activity. I'd love for you to pause the webinar and generate a list of example questions that you have been asked in the past in previous interviews. You can pause the webinar now. No matter how much we prep or practice, it is nearly impossible and highly unlikely that you will know every single question you're going to be asked for every single one of your interviews. That's why it's important to know the 3 most common types of interview questions and some strategies and best practices for answering those types of questions. Knowing the types of questions can help us decode the questions we're currently being asked in an interview setting, and then we can employ some of the best practices and strategies that we've prepped for in order to effectively answer the employer's questions. The 3 types of questions are up on the screen. We're actually going to talk through them with more specifics now. The first type of question is called a traditional interview question. These are the types of questions we've seen a lot in movies. We're probably asked for our part-time jobs. These are questions like, tell me about yourself. Why did you decide to become a teacher? Tell me why you are interested in working for this school district. Why should we hire you as a teacher? What accomplishments are you most proud of? They're traditional. There's likely no right answer. However, a great answer is going to help tie it back to why you are the best fit for this position. So use every answer to demonstrate why you're that best fit. You should spend about 1 to 2 minutes answering these questions, and you should provide a concrete example for them. Some additional examples of these types of questions might be, why did you leave your last job? And what are 2 of your professional strengths and 1 of your professional weaknesses? Behavior-based questions or behavioral questions are when an employer is asking you about a past situation in order to predict future behavior. When they ask this type of question, they're looking for about a 3-minute answer, and they're looking for you to fully tell them a story about a situation that relates to the question at hand. When answering a behavior-based question, a great strategy to employ is to utilize the STAR method, and it's up on the screen right now. These type of questions might be something along the lines of, tell me about an experience when you were a member of a successful or productive team. What part did you play? Or tell me about a time a boss or a coworker that you didn't like, and how did you handle working with him or her? Another example might be, give an example of a time when you were proud of an accomplishment at work. What was that accomplishment? Or, how have you utilized technology to enhance the instruction in a classroom in your prior experience? Finally, an example might be, please tell us about a time when you were faced with multiple tasks or assignments and how you handled the situation. So if we were asked that last question, we would want to utilize the STAR method in order to answer the question. The STAR method is as follows. You want to make sure you're setting the stage by giving an overview of the situation. So with that question in mind, we might set the stage by talking about why we were assigned a project with a group of people. We want to let them know that it was a classroom project that we had to work on creating a lesson plan collaboratively in my student teaching course. And then you want to describe the task. What was the problem that needed to be solved or resolved? And you want this to relate back to the question. So for the question at hand about a time where you had to work on multiple tasks at a time, you might describe that the challenge was that you had to work with a group to create the lesson plan, but you also needed to create a PowerPoint, and you needed to come up with an activity for the rest of the class to do to understand the instruction. So I've now explained that it was a group project, where it was a group project for, and now I've also explained what the competing tasks were. Next, you want to describe the action. You want to talk about what part did you play? What was your contribution? So in relation to this example, I might further describe the problem and what my role was in solving it. How did I help my group prioritize? How did I step up within my leadership and help everybody get all those tasks done? And then finally, you want to make sure that you are including the result. This can be successes, what happened that was good. This could be failure. This could be, it didn't really go well, I didn't step up soon enough, but this is what I learned. So if you are going to utilize a failure for your result, just make sure you bring it back to that learning moment. Technical questions are questions in which they want to hear your logic or your thought process in regards to a specific question that is going to involve a technical skill for your industry. It's important for you to verbalize your thoughts because they're wanting to see how you process through these types of questions. Some example questions for my future teachers would be, how would you accommodate a student with an IEP? What are technology platforms that you will use to enhance learning in the classroom? If we walked into your classroom, what would we see? How would you modify instruction for a gifted student? You're also going to be asked if you have any questions for the employer. I briefly touched upon this earlier, but you want to make sure you have about 3 to 5 questions prepped for that employer. You also can have them prepared on a notepad in front of you. Things that you might want to ask about are things that you care about. How are you going to make your decision effectively on if you're going to accept an offer if you're given one? So you want to ask those questions that matter to you in your search. You can ask about position expectations, culture of the school or the district. You can ask about the students. That's actually really well received with our future teacher positions. And then you also definitely want to make sure that you're throwing in a question about the rest of the timeline for the position and also asking for some contact information for your follow-up. Do not ask any presumptuous questions that might be presuming that you're definitely going to get the job, you're going to get that offer. So don't ask about salary or your benefits. Those are things to stay away from right now. We also want to stay away from anything that's publicly available. So if you could have Google searched it, you don't want to ask about it. Some sample questions you might want to ask are, what are some of the best things about working here? What kind of person is most successful in this role? And how would you describe or characterize the culture of this school district, school, etc.? You always want to make sure to follow up after an interview. You want to follow up within 24 hours of the interview. You can certainly send thank you notes the same day, or if you're going to a job fair, bring some, fill them out in the car, and run back in and drop them off. Nothing's going to beat the handwritten notes, but if you know that a teaching position's process is going to move fast, you want to make sure that you're sending an email instead if you don't have time to send those thank you notes. You want to make sure to express gratitude for the time and consideration that the search committee went through, and you do want to address these notes to every individual you interviewed with. You want to restate confidence that you're the best fit for the position and be enthusiastic in your follow-up, but you also want to confirm or deny interest in the position. If you are no longer interested in a position, this is where you want to make sure you're following up with the hiring manager. So just to one person and letting them know that you are no longer interested in that position. I'd like you to do our last activity. I'd like you to reflect on what is one thing you can do in the next 24 hours to put you on the path to success. Remember, the sooner you start, the further you are going to go. If you do a lot of this prep work now and you start practicing for the interviews that you're going to get for these teaching positions, you're going to be in better shape when you are actually offered those positions once you've applied and hopefully receive that offer. I hope you've learned a lot today. Don't forget, you can practice with us during career advising appointments, but we also have interview stream for you to use virtually.